Hi everyone, Roman Jenkins here, and today on Let's Learn I'm going to be discussing British efforts during World War II to destroy a Norwegian power plant. Now, it was actually a hydroelectric plant attached to a dam in a town called Telemark. This is kind of relevant and important and kind of interesting because of what they were producing at this plant. They were taking a lot of the power that was being generated from the dam and using it to run electrolysis devices in the plant itself. And these were being used to create heavy water. That's D2O is the chemical symbol for that. And it's a form of hydrogen bound to oxygen. And it's denser than regular water. And it was very important to the Nazis during World War II because they thought they could develop a nuclear reactor using D2O as a neutron moderator. And this would allow them to create a sustained uranium reaction that would eventually enrich the uranium or even lead to plutonium if allowed to decay longer. Now this is actually really interesting because it was known for a long time that the Nazis were developing this. Pretty much in 1938, when the first articles on the ability to make or direct nuclear power or even use it to make a weapon of catastrophic proportions were published, the Nazis were very interested in this idea. It'd be a way to end a war if they got into one very quickly, and with the specter of World War II already rising, it became very obvious that they were going to put efforts into this. Luckily for the European continent, a lot of the intellectuals and academia had already left the country and were not working in this program, so that slowed them down significantly. The other problem was heavy water. They didn't have a neutron moderator like heavy water, which is needed to actually direct neutrons and absorb them as they fly off the uranium cores, to balance this out and keep the reaction sustainable so they could enrich it. So they were kind of stuck. And the answer came when they invaded Norway in 1940 because there was an available supply of heavy water at this plant. So a lot of effort was put into taking this plant and holding it for a short period of time. And then as it produced water, the guard levels slowly dropped off. Now, the reason for this is because it was a big country, the Norwegian resistance was very strong, and the German army felt that this was a kind of a safe area. So it was staffed mostly with Austrians who were older or very young and had very little experience in the field or were not really capable soldiers. There were a larger garrison in Telemark, but they weren't significant and they were at least 20 minutes away. So the British recognized the fact that the Nazis would try to build a nuclear weapon or a nuclear reactor and decided that action had to be taken. And it wouldn't be until 1942 and then 1943 before the British actually started acting. They trained a group of commandos, Norwegian commandos, who would scout out the area near the Norwegian power plant there, and they would stay still and direct British soldiers into it and stage a commando raid. Now this was initially termed Operation Grouse, training the Norwegians' partisans to survive in these extreme conditions and getting them prepared for a sabotage operation. This was very successful. So in 1942, in October of 1942, I should say, the British decided to launch Operation Freshman, which was their military wing where they would send in British troops, commandos, and they would actually go in and try to destroy this plant as thoroughly as possible and make heavy water production impossible for the Nazis. The Nazis at this point needed about 2,000 pounds, or a full ton, of heavy water to actually go through with a reactor, or creating a reactor. And they only had about 1,000 pounds at this time, so it was only a matter of time before they had enough to actually create a nuclear reactor and possibly a nuclear bomb. So with this in mind, the British launched in October, as I said, and pretty much promptly all of the planes and gliders that were being used in this operation crashed. Actually, 2 gliders crash landed. All the occupants were killed, and one of the bombers that towed the glider crashed as well. There was a directive on commandos in the German army at that time where pretty much promptly all of them had to be tortured and shot, and several of the people who were in the area, the Nazis, were actually put to death for their actions against these British soldiers in the Nuremberg trials later on. So with this first wave dead, and the garrison suddenly was increased at the plant because it became a very obvious target for raids. Now, the British really wanted to get this plant off the map. The plant was actually told to increase production of heavy water because of the worry that there would be another attack. And so the British decided to parachute in more Norwegians who had been trained in Scotland and in Britain, and have them join the people who were already there, Operation Grouse, which became Operation Swallow at this time. And they were going to take on the power plant themselves. Now, there was only one way to the power plant. If you actually see a picture of it, it looks similar to the fortress from the last dream in Inception. It's high up in a mountain. It's not really super accessible. So they had to find a way through. And the main way through was actually a well-defended bridge. And with a larger garrison there, it became very hard for them to actually try to break through this ring. So they decided to go down the ravine that the bridge spanned and climb up on the other side. And they just had to follow a railroad cart and found an open window in in the base in the power plant, which is Three Stooges' incompetence on the Nazis' part. They ran into no resistance at all during this. So when they got into the plant, the only person they encountered was actually a janitor. And once again, in a fit of Three Stooges moment, he was totally for them destroying this plant as much as possible. So they went into the electrolysis chamber, they planted bombs on all the electrolysis devices, and then to the heavy water tanks that were containing about the ton of heavy water. And before they could light the fuse, in what is now like a third or fourth Three Stooges moment in this entire operation, the janitor forgot that he had left his glasses somewhere in the room that was going to be exploded, and made the rest of the commandos that were still there search for the glasses for him because he couldn't figure out where they were. And after they found the glasses, they were allowed to blow up this thing. They escaped unscathed. Several escaped to Sweden. Some went to different towns or rejoined the general resistance in Norway, and several stayed in the area. Now, the damage they actually did to this plant wasn't irreparable. They were going to restore the electrolysis tanks and be able to get on their way. This also increased the garrison there as well. So it was going to be harder for this place to be hit. The Americans would later bomb the place with only about 100 of the bombs they dropped hitting, and this still wouldn't deter them. So the Germans upped production, and finally they decided that the harassment between the Norwegians and the American bombings had to end, so they decided they had to ship what they had. Now, this turned out to be another Three Stooges moment, as this was actually about a year later. It was February of 1944. It was 1943 when this commando raid took place, by the way. I completely forgot to mention that. And what happened was the heavy water was loaded onto one boat, and one of the saboteurs from the commando raid was still living in the area and found out about this. So he came down, he recognized the captain of the boat, and spoke to him, while in another Three Stooges moment, his buddies who had been in the area during the commando raid snuck on board the boat, planted plastic explosives, and snuck back off before it took away, and then promptly detonated the boat out in a deep lake, actually in a fjord. And that was the end of the Nazi nuclear weapon program. There was no way for them to continue forward. There was no way for them to get ultra-pure graphite, which they would need to watch the uranium reaction, and there wasn't really a way for them to use light water yet. So they were completely screwed by these guys. But it brings up a very important point, that we don't really think of these smaller operations undertaken by nationals during World War II as the big events. We always look to the movies we see, Band of Brothers, actually it's a miniseries, and Saving Private Ryan as the big operations. But these were just as important back in World War II, and they really deserve more recognition. Bye everyone. Hope you had a fun time.
Oh yeah, I roll.